First Vote, which was directed by Chen, a Chinese immigrant and first-time voter herself, provides a realistic look at the diverse Asian American electorate and explores the intersection of immigration, voting rights, and racial justice. And I have to say, what I particularly like about this film is that it teaches us a very important lesson about the connection between politics and racial and ethnic groups in America. And specifically, that we really can't consider these groups to be monolithic. While we often focus on sort of the aggregate of their political ideology or voting behavior, there's really a rich variety within all of these populations, derived from their family history, their formative years of political socialization, education, job experience, and their communities. Chinese Americans are really no exception. And they've been in this country for centuries and come from all walks of life. Much of this is captured in First Vote. So this event tonight is sponsored by the Center for Humanities and the Arts, which is housed here in the graduate school at CU Boulder. And as you may or may not know, Jennifer Ho, one of the panelists this evening, is the center's director. And she's also one of my favorite new faculty members. Her experience featured in this film was captured while she was a professor at the University of North Carolina. Now, the Center for Humanities and the Arts collaborates with departments and research units to support faculty and graduate student research and help to incubate new teaching and training programs. In addition to bringing together academics and students from across disciplines, the center interfaces with the city of Boulder and the larger Colorado community. Now tonight, I have the pleasure of introducing the moderator for our panel, Liz Skewes. Now, Professor Skewes, an old friend of mine here at CU, is chair of the Department of Journalism and interim chair of Advertising, Public Relations, and Media Design in the College of Media Communications and Information here at CU Boulder. Her research focuses on media sociology and news practices, the media's role in electoral politics, and politics in popular culture. She'll ask the panelists questions about voting and civic engagement to reinforce the importance of participating in US democracy through voting. Welcome, Liz, and I turn it over to you now.
Thanks very much, Scott, and it's great to see you here again. Even in Zoom spaces, it's nice to see you. So what I want to do first is introduce our panelists. And first up is Dr. Lance Chen. He is currently trying to find a place to get onto video, so he's not with us visually at the moment. He's an assistant professor in the School of Business at the University of Dayton in Dayton, Ohio. He specializes in stochastic optimization and supply chain management. He's got a PhD from The Ohio State University, and he describes himself as a job creator and business owner dedicated to the prosperity of the United States. Our filmmaker, who's already been introduced briefly, Yi Chen is an independent filmmaker based in Washington, D.C. She's a Soros Equality Fellow and DC Arts and Humanities Fellow. This is her debut film, which has screened at a bunch of film festivals, AFI Docs, Hot Docs, CamFest, LA Pacific Film Festival, Asian Pacific Film Festival, Houston AAPI Film Festival, Nevertheless Film Festival, and Hawaii International Film Festival, which some of these are not at all easy to get into. I know that because I have a friend who's a filmmaker. So the film is distributed by Good Docs for educational institutions and community organizations. Yi Chen has an MFA in Film and Media Arts from American University. She taught at George Mason University's Film and Video Studies program, and she's a member of Brown Girls Docs, Mafia, and Asian American Documentary Network. And thank you for making the film. It is great. Sue Googe is joining us from North Carolina. She ran for the U.S. House of Representatives in 2016. She's the president of Geotech Realty Incorporated in Cary, North Carolina. She was born in China and immigrated to the US in 1998 to attend Wake Tech Community College for Computer Science. She then went to UNC Chapel Hill, studying information and library science. She became an American citizen in 2005. She founded Geotech Realty in 2010, and she and her husband live in Wake County, North Carolina. Jennifer Ho, my colleague at CU now, and I'm grateful to have her here. She's the daughter of a refugee father from China and an immigrant mother from Jamaica. As already mentioned, she's the director of the Center for Humanities and the Arts at CU Boulder. And also she holds an appointment as a professor of ethnic studies. She's president of the Association for Asian American Studies. She's the author of three scholarly monographs. She's also very active in her community around issues of race and intersectionality. She leads workshops on anti-racism and how to talk about race in our current political climate. And if you want to follow her on Twitter, she is at Dr. Jen Ho, which you can see in her name. And then Kaiser Kuo, he's the host of the Sinica podcast, which is a weekly current affairs podcast that's been on the air since 2010. He's a native of upstate New York, spent his teens in Tucson, Arizona, and graduated from UC Berkeley in political science before spending a year in China. He came back to the US for graduate school and then went back to China, lived there until 2016, where he played in a heavy metal band called Tang Dynasty. And you can see the guitars in the background. He co-founded that band when he was a student. He went on to a career in journalism, one of my favorites, then joined China's leading search engine, Baidu, where he served as Director of International Communications. He came back to the US in 2016, and he lives in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, with his wife and 2 children. So those are our panelists. I really want to thank you all for being here and for being a part of this film, and to Yi for producing the film, directing it, making it. I wanted to let everybody know that we do want everybody to be respectful in our conversations with each other. I may interrupt sometimes. I'm going to do my best Savannah Guthrie and try to keep things moving along. But I prefer, not to have us talk over each other if at all possible. So I wanted to start with kind of a broad question, which is the documentary was filmed as we were heading into the 2018 midterm elections. And all of you were very active in that election. And so I first wanted to ask, and this is really for everybody, has your perspective on politics changed? And where do you think about where we're headed as a nation, and kind of where are you now in your political journey since you were part of this film? Sue, since I see you at the top of my screen, I'm going to go ahead and ask you to kind of go first, and then I'll call on the others.
Well, thank you, Lizzie, for having me. Thank you. You produced this film. Yeah, did I change? Yes, a little bit. Back in 2016, I was a newbie. Okay, totally new to the American political scene, because back in 2014 or 2013, I couldn't even name what Republicans stand for or what Democrats stand for, and we barely can name both parties. And so it was a very steep learning curve, and I learned a lot every day. And it was, I would say the biggest change is the idea of globalists, the Washington swamp, the, quote unquote, the colonial capitalism. The special interest group control our politics. So that's why 2 bases, the Republican base and the Democrat base, do not feel their politicians, as soon as they elect to Washington, D.C., representing their value anymore. And I did find out one of the biggest change for me was the special interest group actually control both parties. It's not, for example, back in George W. Bush's time, which I didn't have the rights to vote. At that time, I would have voted Al Gore and John Kelly at the time, if I have a right to vote. But at that time, Republican Party seemed to control by the globalists, which means they make decisions, especially those foreign decisions, was not based on Americans' interests, was not based on American people's interests. American people would manipulate, stage and manipulate into a war. And back then, Democrat Party was stood up for American workers, were fighting to bring jobs back to America. They were fighting, they were on the side of American workers, because American middle classes, it was essential. It was the social fabric to build this country. Without a prosperous middle classes, actually we will be heading down to the road of South America, have a super wealthy and large percentage of poverty. So to me, 2016 and 2020, it was changes. And Republican Party all of a sudden, and Democrat was shift the road. Now Republican Party was the one fighting for American workers and fighting for the underdogs. And now the Democrat Party was driven away for some other agenda we never heard about it. So that's something changed for me. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Kaiser, kind of same question. How has your perspective on politics shifted since you were involved with this documentary? And if so, how? And if not, where are you right now politically? You're on mute.
My passions have substantially deepened as the emergency has deepened, as this country has careened even more closely to disaster. I think it's become more and more clear to me, and I think to a lot of the people around me, that the GOP, and especially its presidential nominee, represent values that I regard as absolutely abhorrent, that by my lights, they now stand for not much more than selfishness, egoism, pettiness, narrow-mindedness, intolerance, greed, anti-intellectualism, an absolute lack of civil-mindedness, of civic-mindedness, an absence of empathy, of basic compassion. I mean, it is, to me now, where my disagreements with traditional republicanism could be contained, in a very civil kind of a discussion. It's hard now for me to do that. It's become a literally dangerous worldview we're living now. I think with the consequences, it's clear to me, of its outright rejection of science, of what medical science has repeatedly told us since the outset of this pandemic. We're also living, I think, with the consequences of their rejection of climate science, and that is going to take an even greater toll on humanity. I think the true colors have really come out now, and I find them to be so fundamentally frightening to me, so antithetical to my views, not just as an American, but as a citizen of this planet.
Okay, great. Thanks. Jennifer, I'm gonna pick on you next. So again, same question, kind of where are you now? And how have you shifted at all, if at all, since 2018 or since the midterms?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I would say that politically, I probably haven't shifted really at all. I've been a lifelong Democrat. I voted already. I walked over my ballot because Colorado has mail-in balloting. But I think similar to Kaiser, I'm seeing the stakes in this particular elections to actually go beyond electoral partisan politics and really be ones that I think are about not just human rights, but but planetary existence. And I know that sounds hyperbolic, but I truly believe that the vote that is happening now is actually a vote and a referendum on the future of our existence.
Thank you. Lance,
I'm here. I'm here.
It's good to see you.
So for me to answer that question,
yes,
I come here as a immigrant, and I think I get politically engaged into political activities simply because I think as an immigrant, I love this country. And also, I love the value of this country, like Constitution, this rich history, Constitution, Bill of Rights, and all kinds of things. The founding father has said, and this country becomes the #1 country in the world in every aspect, just because I think we have a great political foundation on the Constitution, Bill of Rights, all kinds of things. Well, back in 2004, I was a Democrat, I think. Although I cannot vote, but I attended one of the Kerry's campaign on campus of Ohio State. But since then, I noticed there are several things that are happening. The cancel cultures. And General Washington, look at my picture, my virtual background is General Washington across the Delaware River to attack the Trenton and the Princeton, to win the last battle in 1776 against the British. And I'm a big fan of him, and also Thomas Jefferson, and also Benjamin Franklin, John Adams. All these people are the greatest founding fathers. They set a high bar. I think the U.S. Constitution and Bill of Rights are I think the best ever Constitution founding documents for our country. But here's the problem. Right now, I noticed that the cancel culture are trying to tear down the Washington statue, tear down, Benjamin Franklin's talk, and Ulysses General Ulysses Grant is the statues down. That bothers me a lot. I think that's fundamentally change the U.S. to a socialist country, to something like, I don't know what's the country going to look like, but I believe law and order and also the American values. That's why I'm here, because I love this country. I love the constitutional value of this country, but I disagree with the cancel culture strongly. I think this country needs law and order. And my political view hasn't been changed ever. If you say it's actually my political view got strengthened. I already voted by absentee ballot in the great state of Ohio, and I vote, President Trump, and we need 4 more years of President Trump in the White House.
Like we need a hole in their head.
Okay, I want to check in with Yi, Chen, and ask you, I want to reframe the question slightly for you, which is, first, if you could tell us a little bit about why you made this documentary, what motivated you, and then talk a little bit about what you learned through the process and where you are now politically.
For me?
No, for
the question is for me?
For the filmmaker, Yi Chen.
Well, you want to tell the truth? Because Yi gave me a phone call, and her voice is very sweet.
Not a question for you, man.
Lance,
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Yi, please.
Yeah, hi, Elizabeth. I started the project after the 2016 election. So I started the project in early 2017. At the time, I saw growing participation from Asian American voters on both sides. So if you've seen the film, the opening of the film, right? There's very passionate participation from both sides. So and it's also my personal journey to meet. I wanted to meet voters in my own community from both sides, and I really wanted to go to battleground states and talk to voters in battleground states, because at the time I was in the process of becoming an American citizen, and so I had never voted before, and I was really interested in knowing why voters in my own community vote the way they do. So that's how I got interested in this project. So I actually became a citizen last year, and I'm actually a first-time voter myself this year.
Congratulations.
So thank you. Yeah, so I would say before I made this film, I didn't really know why voters vote the way they do in my community on both sides. And because, throughout the whole journey of making this film, I definitely have a much better understanding of that.
Thank you. We've got a couple of questions coming up in the chat area. So I wanted to, and I'm not quite sure who this is addressed to, so I'm just going to throw it out there and see who wants to respond. Comes from Jenny Liu. How can you be pro-America when the US was basically built on anti-Asianness and the indentured servitude of Chinese people? Why is it bad to address past wrongs of a country? And how do those figureheads represent those values?
I think that's for Lance and Sue, especially for Lance.
I'm more than happy to answer this question. I do not believe this country was built upon anti-Asian. This country was built upon the people came from Europe. They are seeking for freedom to build a country over here. And the Asian American, I don't know, it's a very interesting fact. The Asian born here, they complain about racism. But if they compare the people live in China, we were managed by our own races. Okay, our own president back in China, our same races. In Taiwan, also managed by races. And the life is much worse. The discrimination was much worse from where we come from. And nobody say, well, if it's discrimination by your own race, it doesn't count discrimination. You see the people coming from South America, walk across Mexican border coming to America. You know who they ran from? They ran from the men of their own races. As they say, is there anything racist in the country? Well, guess what? Because they're all the same races. And they still ran away from the man was their same races rule them. If the people from North Korea, are they going to run from their own racist man? I mean, I feel like this racism thing is blown out of proportion. People born in America, they have no idea how lucky they are to be born in here. They have a lot of privilege any other people in the rest of the world do not have. And it's very unfortunate. The only thing they can focus is racism. I came here with nothing. I built from ground up. I became a very successful entrepreneur. If anybody say, if I experience any discrimination, it's on my home country. America is the most welcoming country in the whole world. I'm very grateful here.
Thank you, Sue.
Can I add something?
Yes.
Yeah. First of all, I apologize because I cannot hear you clearly. That's I answered part of Yi's question. I apologize about that. And also, I have to tell the reason I like to participate in Yi's the film is she gave me a phone call. Actually, the voice was very nice. I say, hey, okay, such a sweet voice, and I probably cannot decline. So that's part of the reason I participate. And as for the racism, I disagree with the. I disagree. I don't think there's a anti-Asian racism. The reason is I'm an entrepreneur. There's some people working for me, and there are some people who work with me and something. There may be some racist. I don't know, but you know. But one piece of advice I would offer is, if you want to accuse other people racist, you better have the evidence and make it very serious, like a lawsuits or something, and don't just you know, try to play the risk card for your benefit or just for complaining. I build some business. I think I'm good. I'm okay. I have lots of people working for me, and mostly they are white people. Looks very tough. Tattoos all over the place. White people, tough, mid-aged men. We exchange jokes all the time. And by the end of the day, people judge you by how are you doing a good job or not. All right, most of people. There may be some racist to what I heard, but you know, if you're against the racist, if there's something racist happening to you, racism happening to you, you better be serious and pick up you can pick up a fight and doing something in the court. But I will not just generally say the U.S. is a racism country. No, I highly disagree with that.
I kind of want to pull in, Jennifer Kaiser into this conversation as well, because one of the things that has led to some, and I understand your point, both Sue and Lance, but one of the things that has happened, especially around COVID-19, is we have a president who has persistently referred to COVID-19 as China virus, sometimes calling it Kung flu. This is something that I think at least causes other people to perceive him as being racist. And it's off-putting for a lot of people, Chinese Americans as well as others. And so I'm going to let Jennifer first Kaiser speak to this a little bit, and then we'll come back to Sue and Lance if you'd like to join in.
I'll let Kaiser go first, and then I'm happy to answer this question.
Okay.
Well, sure. I mean, I think that anyone who can't see that there is a serious problem with race in America is quite willfully blind to it. And I really question their intellectual sincerity when they say something like that, because it's shocking to me. I mean, and Lance suggested that we bring actual data and information on this. I suggest you look at the actual statistical uptick in incidents of reported hate crimes, including quite violent acts against people of East Asian descent, really, noticeably upticking from the moment our president, from that bully pulpit, from that moral stage that he commands, started to use that phrase, as Liz said, Kung flu, or the China virus, the Chinese virus. I don't know how much more evidence you actually need. I don't know what your interpretation would be of why Trump spoke the way he did to Wei Jiazhang of CBS News in a press conference. I mean, where he, when asked about this, was just deliberately belligerent to her and said, "Why don't you ask that of China? Why don't you ask?" And singled her out because she's somebody of Asian ethnicity. I feel actually sorry for you if you can't see the racism that's so endemic in the political party that you purport to represent, especially in this administration. I think it's shameful. We saw it in his response to Charlottesville. We've seen it in his response to, talking about in the last debate to the Proud Boys. We've seen him not just dog whistle, but overtly blow, quite audible whistles at white supremacist groups in the United States. We've seen it in his reaction to the Black Lives Matter movement, but I mean, specifically here in this group of Chinese and Asian Americans, all summer long, his administration has pulled out all the stops, and one after another has gone after the People's Republic of China in ways that are quite clearly meant to stigmatize Asians in the United States. I mean, there is a rising kind of xenophobia. There's a new McCarthyism that is singling out scientists, researchers of Chinese ethnic extraction, and racially profiling them. This is something that is well attested and well documented, and by any statistical measure that you want to look at, whether it's security clearances that are granted or withdrawn, whether it's visa applications, whether it's, there is a clear policy now that seems to want to criminalize Chineseness in this country. And it goes well beyond the purely foreign policy and national security motivations.
Jennifer, did you want to follow on?
Sure. So what I would like to invite my two panelists is to read some of the things that I've written, or some of the things that other scholars of Asian American studies and critical race theory have written. I think that the way that US history has been taught makes it seem that the US was founded by European Americans for European Americans primarily, but that's actually not the true history of the United States. The history of the United States is one of settler colonialism, of people from Europe who came and conquered and took land forcibly from the indigenous people who lived in the United States. And it's also about exploitation, about the system of chattel slavery that developed such that the system of race and racism became intertwined. And that, again, mainly Europeans brought people from the sub-Saharan continent of Africa to other lands, to the Americas, including to the United States. And then it is also true that there's been the exploitation of Chinese coolie labor, Chinese Indian labor to the Caribbean and to North America as well. All of this is true. And I think what's incumbent on us as scholars and as American citizens who care about the truth is to know this history and not to shy away from it. And so I believe in the promise of America. And unfortunately, the promise of America hasn't happened yet. But one of the things I feel really proud of is that I, as the daughter of a refugee father and an immigrant mother, can talk about this, can write books about this, can engage in civil debate and dialogue about this. And that's my right as an American, that I can voice my dissent and speak the truth about the American history that I know.
Yeah, didn't know if you wanted to add anything in. Again, since you made the film, I'm thinking maybe you have some thoughts about where we are now in terms of how we're talking about Asian Americans, and particularly around this issue of racism that maybe a lot of people at least think is coming out of the administration.
Yeah, so when I made the film in 2017 and 2018, you know, I definitely did not expect that the film will be relevant in the way it, you know, not just the election, but everything else that's going on, right? So at the time, you know, when I was filming with Jennifer and her class discussion on Asian American identity in the South, and her class on a critical race theory class, and also what happened in North Carolina with the Silent Sam statue. So I felt that I wanted to capture that because that was what was happening back then. But you know, ever since the film was released in May, and just based on audience reaction and the panels that we've been doing, the film, and also there's a scene in the film where Kaiser was doing the podcast with the Asian Society guests, and they were talking about you know, U.S.-China trade war and yellow peril, and so all those scenes that I captured back then, you know, it just feels really surreal to me. Now the film is like, all these things are still relevant today.
Wow.
That's not something, you know, I did not expect that.
So the work has legs, as they say. I wanted to go to a question, and again, I kind of want all of you to engage with this if you don't mind, but it really does deal with the fact that we are in a very polarized time in our politics.
Hey, Katie, can we comment on the racial and virus thing? Oh, okay. So let's make this one very clear. First of all, I'm not a fan of identity politics. So we're all Americans, okay? And that's the first point I need to make. And second of all, I need to let everybody understand that President Trump is a uniter for this nation. And President Obama is a divider for the nation, okay? The third thing I'm trying to make is, this is China virus. Let's make it very clear. This is China virus. And President Trump say that simply because you need to find out the timelines. Because back in, I think, February, early March, the Chinese officials at the news conference officially accused that United States military actually could be. That's a pure speculation. There's no baseless accusation. Say American military bring the virus, whatever it is, to Wuhan and then start the pandemic. That's what happens in the first. And President Trump is a counterpuncher. And they just want everybody understand this virus come from China. And we can call the flu Spanish flu, and we can call this China virus. I have no problem about that.
Yeah, and, there's the evidence, the argument that somehow this was tied to the military and brought over has been widely debunked by most of the research that I've seen. So I want to push back on that point a little bit, but I do want to kind of get into this area of polarization, because so much of how we feel about things is driven by which team we decide that we're on, right? That instead of a time when we would sit down and talk about things and our disagreements, we find it harder to talk to people who disagree with us. And so some of that comes from us staying in our own information silos. A lot of us have a tendency to do that. So I want to ask you a little bit, maybe again, each of you to speak to, where do you get your information? What sources of information do you rely on to have a better understanding of things? And how do you try to bridge the gap with people who might disagree with you?
May I go first?
Sure.
Lizzie, I couldn't agree with you more. And you listen from Kaiser and Jennifer Hall, and they focus on what they really care about one thing. And me and Legion, probably we care about other things. It looks like we have the information. They got this information, we got this information. So there's something in between. And that's why we don't see eye to eye. Something you feel so passionate about, probably we don't see it bothering us. Something we should feel so passionate about, we probably don't care. So we call ourselves Asian American, which I agree with Legion. I totally dismay identity politics. I am American. Why I need a prefix? Why I need a prefix to call me Asian American? I am American. In front of Constitution, I'm American. I'm paying tax, I'm going to job and driving on the road as American. The scanner and for the toll road didn't say, oh, okay, Asian American, 50 cents, white American, 80 cents. No, we are human, okay? So the identity politics almost bring me back about communist China. For those of you lucky to be born in here to enjoy the freedom, not your own race provide, for China, thousands of years, none of the emperor ever promote free speech. Okay, this is not Chinese cultural things. I want to get it out of the way. For those of you lucky to be born in America, enjoy free speech. And this is something that's not from your own culture, not from my culture. And that's why we come here, something we don't have. Otherwise, we shouldn't even need to bother to come over here. I even lost my train of thought.
Yeah.
Okay. So
I don't know if I can
talking
be the
about
second.
So
Oh,
about
I'm
those
sorry.
those polarization things, I think it was divide and conquer. It fresh made back about communism, because in China, back then was 93% was Han Chinese. Han Chinese. If you read history, talk about racism, okay, during the Yuan dynasty, Han was the fourth class citizens. Racism exists since mankind, okay? That's why you form tribe, that's why you form country, and this is why divide and conquer land, that's already existing since mankind. We don't need to specifically condemn American, European for that, and we all benefit from that. If we come here, the American Indians still here, we're going to be greeted by bow and arrow, okay? So you think European conquered the land and we all enjoying it in here. And in communist China, it was divide and conquer because there's no racist issue. We were very homogeneous country. The minority run but are already in the mountains. So the divide and conquer is in China, divide and conquer by occupation. The worker was the #1 classes. The farmer was second-class citizen. The student was a third-class citizen. I remember teacher was the 9th-class citizens. And right now, American doing this race-wise, it was exactly communism tactics, divide and conquer. Why can't I be American? Why I need to wear a prefix as Asian American? What's Asian American so special about I need to behave differently or participate in the politics differently? So I disagree with this identity politics thing.
Okay.
And victimize minority. Why minority enjoy the best life they never have in their home country? Otherwise, why bother to come here?
I do want to, so this idea though of how do we bridge this gap, because one of the things that this form of government was premised on is this idea that we should come together. I mean, not in a time of COVID, we would actually gather around a table and talk out our differences, but we don't do that anymore. We tend to argue our differences rather than talk. And so I'm going to throw maybe the question to Kaiser, to Jennifer, and then I'll come to you, Lance, if you want to chime in.
Yeah, I think media fragmentation is a very, very serious problem that we have not wrestled with in a serious way. The age of sort of trusted gatekeeper media sources, that's gone, but there's not been something to replace it. And in this interstitial period, we are really suffering badly from terrible fragmentation with increased tribalism, with this phenomenon that we've all seen, where we are so victimized by our own selection bias. What do I do? You started the question off by asking, how do we try and find trusted sources of media? Well, I'm actually kind of old school about it. I actually believe that when there are newsrooms of dedicated professionals who have, you know, who look, nobody goes into journalism for the money, right? I mean, they go into the profession of journalism because they have a commitment to truth telling, and there are, or at least that's how it used to be. I think there are still genuinely reputable news organizations out there for whom there is a conspicuous effort at objectivity, and if since that is always elusive, at least in trying to be dispassionate and impartial and to report different sides of it. And ironically, it's this core pillar of American I think of American civil society, the fourth estate, which has always had such a critical role to play, that is under daily assault from this presidency. It's really ironic. I mean, he has done more to erode the really important role that the media should be playing. Look, it's never been perfect. There's been jaundiced media in this country for a very long time. It's, we didn't start. The newspapers, the idea of newspapers as dispassionate and apolitical really, didn't take hold in this country until well into the 19th century. Prior to that, they were deliberately partisan. I mean, you bought, newspapers that were specifically of a particular partisan bent. We've gone back, unfortunately, to that now, and I think that it's a dangerous thing, and I am frankly very disappointed by some of the media, even on my own on my own side of the political spectrum. So I think that what we need to do is really educate ourselves and not listen to sort of crackpot versions of history that are viewed by people who clearly don't have much of a grasp on how actually Chinese history or American history operated, and who have this really strange kind of cherry-picked dogmatic view of how it is. I hope that anyone here who is a serious student of history and who's heard some of the characterizations that we've just been subjected to knows that they should take them with a very serious grain of salt.
I want to be aware of the time because there is a major political event that's happening in about 15 minutes. And so, Jennifer, rather than throwing the question to you, there was a question that came in on the chat. First of all, thanks to you for making the film and capturing the range of voices and perspectives in it. But there's a question to both Lance and Sue. And Lance, I'm going to start with you. And the question is, what's the main reason that you support Trump? Is it economic policy? Is it trade? Is it his handling of the COVID crisis? And, kind of a question as well about how you see, and this is particular because Lance, you had said this, how you see Trump as a uniter and Obama as a divider, because that's not how a lot of other people see these two presidents. So.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I fully agree with the Kaiser that in the summer, during the pandemic, I have nothing else to do, no travel, no nothing. So I stay at home, borrow a lot of history books about American history since 1754 to 1792. Okay, because that's the entire independence war about, and the Constitution Convention, and the Constitution ratification, everything. So I read through. It's about 10 to 11 books. It doesn't take a lot of time since you stay at home and nothing else to do. I read all these books, and I can tell you the media has been biased from the very beginning. And when John Adams ran the re-election campaign, Hamilton using a media against John Adams, and Jefferson using some media friends and against John Adams and say something bad about it, and John Adams say something bad about the Jefferson, and all the time. So they are not honest. They hasn't been honest. They are biased. So it happens in the beginning of this wonderful republic, I tell you. So don't feel surprised that the bias exists at the media. I read all of this, it surprised me. It looks like a fake news CNN to me sometimes if you support one way or the other. So, but when you look at it, so you understand. So the American is a great idea.
And to defend your own right or interest or whatever, you need to fight for it. So, and that's my understanding on that. And so, if you have interest, I would like to say more, but we don't have more time about it. Let's talk about the uniter. President Trump create jobs. President Trump create something called opportunity zone to make investment to the inner cities, to have the lowest possible unemployment rate for Hispanic Americans and Latino Americans and the Black Americans and then whatever and the Asian Americans. And he is actually a uniter, right? Because he is a defender of law and order. But Obama do the totally opposite. If you can go back to time at 2014 or 2000 something, Ferguson, Missouri, or Zimmerman case in Florida. So the local, I believe law and order. I like John Adams. John Adams defend the British officers in the after the Boston massacre. And he won. They acquitted most of them. And so I'm a fan of him. And I'm a fan of law and order. And this country is based on law and order. And President Trump is always defending law and order. And Obama work opposite him.
Lance, I can respect that, but defending law and order does not necessarily indicate somebody is uniting the country. And we are at a point where, as citizens, again, we are more polarized than ever. Families don't talk to each other anymore sometimes because of their political differences. So supporting—
I don't know that part. I don't know that part. My family is very united.
Okay, your family. Do actually, and again, we've only got 4 minutes left, and I apologize for the tightness on the time, but we want people to be able to step off and see the debate. So I wanted to ask Yi to step in one more time, and what I want to ask you, Yi, is as you think about the documentary that you created, and again, this kind of election season, we're less than 2 weeks away from an election, and who knows how long away from an election result, because we don't know that we'll have one on election day or even the day after. What is it that you want people to take away from your film as they see it, and as you think about the political system that we have and the political discord that we have in the country right now? What do you want people to learn from your documentary?
Oh, I think there are mainly two things. I think one, like you said, Elizabeth, the country is so polarized right now. So I think one thing that I hope audience will walk away with is, it doesn't, regardless of which side you're on, I hope the film give audience a way to understand the voters on the other side, that they don't necessarily agree, but see it from their perspective. And I think the second thing is, I really hope the film will inspire voters go out and vote this year.
I'm with you there. We've got maybe 1 more minute if anybody wants
Actually, Elizabeth, I would just love to know your own thoughts, since I think as the moderator and the chair, you should have the last word.
All right, well, I'm going to agree with you. I think everybody needs to get out and vote, but not more importantly, because that's really important, but just as important is that to remember that election day is kind of one day or season, since we have early voting, but that regardless of what the outcome is, and I have my preferred outcome, but regardless of the outcome, we all have a political voice that we need to continue to use going forward. It's not about an election day and then stay silent for 4 years. And I think the panelists here exemplify the fact that you need to stay engaged with the political system to try and make it stronger and make it better. And I would hope, I think, that we do find more ways to talk to each other instead of across each other. I think that's important for political understanding.
I think that's all well and good, but I think that we are in a genuine emergency right now. I think that kumbaya is not the moment for this. This man is worse in so many ways than any traditional Republican. He is so fundamentally anti-democratic. He doesn't disguise his authoritarian impulses. I think that is those very impulses that actually resonate with certain of his supporters, including some of the people here tonight. I think that his vindictiveness, his constant attacks on the Fourth Estate, his flagrant disregard for long-established norms, including his refusal to place his company in trust, his refusal to disclose his tax returns.
Do you know if a white person describe an Asian in that manner, you will call him hate speech?
So I wouldn't disagree. And again, this is something where we will disagree about whether the outcome is good, depending on where we stand. If Trump gets reelected, some people here will be very upset. If Biden gets elected, others will be very upset. I think the point that I'm trying to make is that engagement, political engagement, as strongly as you feel about this, it means that and I know you all do this, it means that we need to stay involved and keep fighting the fight for what we think benefits the nation. And I do think, to the degree that we can start to learn to talk across the aisle a little bit, that helps us move forward as a nation, even when we strongly disagree and even when we see things that we think are incredibly troublesome. So we need to say that out loud, and we need to keep fighting the good fight. It is 6:55, so the debate starts in about 5 minutes, and we are going to sign off here so that people can take a quick break before they engage in the next political discussion of the evening. I do want to thank all of you for being here. I think this is something a conversation we could have for about the next 3 hours, and I would love
Katie, just one word, can I?
We really need to sign off. Maybe at the next chance. So I just want to thank everybody for being here. I appreciate it. You are all important political activists, and I hope you can stay involved. Thank you all.